The heavy, ornate doors of the Ye family villa felt like the gates of a gilded prison to Ye Anran. Inside, the air was thick with the cloying scent of lilies and unspoken malice. Today was the day her fate, as decreed by her father, Ye Weiguo, and her venomous stepmother, Liu Lanhua, was to be sealed. She, Ye Anran, the illegitimate daughter, the family's perpetual shadow, was to be sacrificed on the altar of their ambition, married off to President Ma, a man whose lecherous gaze and reputation for brutality were as well known as his considerable, albeit dubiously acquired, wealth. "Anran, President Ma is a good match for you," Weiguo had stated, his voice devoid of paternal warmth, his eyes fixed on the potential business merger this union would facilitate. "Don't cause any trouble. It's for the good of the family." Good of the family? Anran had wanted to scream. Or good for your business and your legitimate daughter, Ye Qingqing. But she had learned long ago that defiance only brought more pain. Liu Lanhua, her stepmother, reveled in such opportunities. "Know your place, Anran." Liu Lanhua would sneer, her voice dripping with disdain. "You should be grateful we even allow you to carry the Ye name. Marrying President Ma is more than you deserve." The thought of President Ma's clammy hands, his predatory smile, sent a shiver of revulsion down Anran's spine. She had seen how he treated his previous wives, heard the whispers of his cruelty. No, she would not be another broken doll for his collection. Desperation, sharp and cold, spurred a daring plan. There was one loophole, one slim chance of escape. If she were already married, the betrothal to President Ma would be void. But to whom? She had no suitor, no secret lover waiting in the wings. Time was running out. Clutching a hastily prepared contract marriage agreement and a bank card containing the entirety of her meager savings, 100 yuan, a sum she had painstakingly accumulated, she found herself standing before the imposing entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. She needed a groom, any groom, and fast. Her eyes scanned the sparse crowd. Then she saw him. He was leaning against a wall, looking downcast, an air of weary resignation about him. He was nondescript, dressed in simple, almost shabby clothes. He looked, for all intents and purposes, like a man down on his luck, perhaps another soul trapped by circumstance. He might be desperate enough, Anran thought, a flicker of ruthless pragmatism cutting through her fear. Taking a deep breath, she approached him. "Excuse me," she began, her voice trembling slightly despite her resolve. "Are you here to get married?" The man looked up, his eyes surprisingly clear and assessing. "No," he replied, his voice calm, almost indifferent. "Then, would you be willing to marry me?" Anran blurted out, the words tumbling over each other. "It's a contract marriage. I'll pay you 100 yuan. We register the marriage. You cooperate with me for a short period, and then we divorce. You won't have to do anything else." A faint smile touched the corners of his lips, a fleeting expression that Anran, in her agitation, barely registered. A contract marriage? For 100 yuan? He seemed to consider it for a moment, his gaze lingering on her anxious face. "All right," he said, with an ease that was almost disconcerting. "I agree." His name, she learned as they filled out the forms, was Lu Mingcheng. He offered no personal details, asked no probing questions. He simply signed where she indicated, his handwriting firm and elegant, a stark contrast to his unassuming appearance. Within the hour, Ye Anran was a married woman, bound by law to a man she had met less than 60 minutes prior. A wave of dizzying relief washed over her, quickly followed by a cold tide of uncertainty. What had she just done? Who was this Lu Mingcheng, this stranger who had agreed to become her husband with such astonishing alacrity? But there was no time for regret. The first battle had been won. Now she had to face her family. The heavy silence in the Ye family's ostentatious living room was broken only by the rhythmic ticking of an antique grandfather clock, each tick a countdown to an explosion. Ye Anran stood defiant, Lu Mingcheng a quiet, unassuming presence by her side. Her father, Ye Weiguo, stared at the red marriage certificate in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. Liu Lanhua, her stepmother, looked ready to combust, while her stepsister, Ye Qingqing, regarded Lu Mingcheng with unconcealed derision. You did what? Weiguo finally sputtered, his face a mottled purple. You dare defy me? With this nobody? He is my husband, Lu Mingcheng, Anran stated, her voice surprisingly steady. The legal document in her hand felt like a shield. Our marriage is registered. Your arrangement with President Ma is therefore null and void. Liu Lanhua lunged forward, her perfectly manicured nails aimed at Anran's face. You ungrateful wretch! How dare you bring such shame upon this family? Marrying a pauper, a loser. Lu Mingcheng moved, almost imperceptibly, placing himself slightly in front of Anran. Liu Lanhua, confronted by his calm, unwavering gaze, faltered. There was something in his eyes, a depth, a stillness, that was unnervingly at odds with his shabby attire. Stepmother, Anran said, finding strength in his silent support. This is my legal husband. Any prior agreements are no longer valid. Ye Qingqing never one to miss an opportunity for cruelty, sneered. Anran, you always did have terrible taste. Where did you pick up this vagrant? Does he even have a job? Can he afford to feed himself, let alone a wife? She eyed Mingcheng's simple clothes with exaggerated disgust. Look at him. He probably smells of cheap labor. Lu Mingcheng merely smiled faintly, a slight upturn of his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. Miss Ye, my ability to provide for my wife is my concern, not yours. His voice was quiet, yet it carried an unexpected weight, silencing Qingqing's tirade momentarily. Anran felt a flicker of surprise. This loser had a composure, a dignity, that her own supposedly high-status family sorely lacked. The arrival of President Ma, a portly man with a leering smile and eyes that roamed Anran's form with possessive hunger, escalated the tension. Anran, my dear, your father told me you were being a little rebellious. Come now, don't be difficult. His gaze dismissed Lu Mingcheng as if he were a piece of furniture. President Ma, Anran said, stepping forward, I regret to inform you that I am already married. This is my husband, Lu Mingcheng. President Ma's face contorted with rage. Married? To this beggar? Ye Weiguo? Is this how you honor our agreement? It's true, President Ma. She went behind our backs. Ye, Weiguo stammered, his earlier anger now tinged with fear as he faced the potential loss of a lucrative business deal. The marriage is legal, Anran reiterated, holding up the certificate. There is nothing you can do. The ensuing scene was a cacophony of threats, insults, and Liu Lanhua's theatrical wails. Through it all, Lu Mingcheng remained an island of calm. He didn't raise his voice, didn't engage in the shouting match. He simply stood by Anran, a silent, solid presence that somehow lent her courage. When President Ma, in his fury, made a move towards Anran, Mingcheng's hand shot out, not aggressively, but with a swiftness that intercepted Ma's arm. His grip, Anran noted with a start, was surprisingly strong. President Ma, Mingcheng said, his voice still quiet, but now laced with an unmistakable warning. My wife has made her decision. I suggest you respect it. There was a moment of stunned silence. President Ma, unaccustomed to being thwarted, especially by someone he considered beneath his notice, stared at Mingcheng, a flicker of uncertainty in his piggy eyes. Liu Lanhua and Ye Qingqing looked on, momentarily speechless. Finally, With a string of curses, President Ma stormed out, vowing retribution. Ye Weiguo, pale and trembling, could only glare at Anran. "You've ruined us!" Liu Lanhua shrieked. "Get out! Get out of this house, and take your beggar husband with you." "With pleasure," Anran said, a newfound sense of liberation, however precarious, bubbling within her. She glanced at Lu Mingcheng. He met her gaze, a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Together, they walked out of the Ye family villa, leaving behind a scene of impotent fury and thwarted greed. The first act of her desperate play was over. The consequences, she knew, were yet to come. The taxi ride to Lu Mingcheng's apartment was conducted in a strained silence. Anran, still reeling from the confrontation and the audacity of her own actions, stole furtive glances at the man beside her. He sat calmly, gazing out the window, his expression unreadable. Who was he, really? Why had he agreed so readily to her outrageous proposal? His humble abode, as he'd wryly termed it, was a small, one-bedroom apartment in an older, less fashionable district of the city. It was a world away from the opulent splendor of the Ye Villa. Yet, as Anran stepped inside, she was surprised. The space, though small, was impeccably clean and organized. Books lined one wall, not a random collection, but titles that spoke of a keen intellect and diverse interests: philosophy, classical literature, complex economic treatises. On a simple desk, a high-quality fountain pen lay next to a worn, leather-bound journal. These were not the possessions of a loser. "It's not much," Mingcheng said, a hint of apology in his voice, though his eyes held that familiar faint amusement. "But it's clean." "It's fine," Anran replied, trying to reconcile the man before her with the image she had constructed. She took out her bank card. "This is the 100, 0 yuan, as agreed. And here," she added, pulling out a few thousand in cash, "for living expenses. I'll find a job soon, and I'll contribute more." He looked at the money, then at her. "The 100, 0 is for the contract. I don't need anything for living expenses." He gently pushed the cash back towards her. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I do right now." His refusal, his quiet dignity, further unsettled her. It was not the behavior of a man desperate for money. Their cohabitation began awkwardly. They were two strangers bound by a bizarre contract, sharing a small space. Anran, accustomed to the slights and manipulations of her family, found herself treading carefully, unsure of his boundaries, his expectations. Mingcheng, however, was an enigma of politeness and quiet consideration. He gave her the bedroom, taking the small sofa in the living room for himself. He cooked simple but surprisingly delicious meals, which they ate mostly in silence. He rarely spoke of himself, and when Anran, driven by a growing curiosity, tried to ask about his past or his work, his answers were vague, deflecting. Meanwhile, Anran threw herself into her job search. Her law degree, though from a good university, was overshadowed by her illegitimate status. A fact her stepmother had ensured was subtly broadcast in their social circles. After several rejections, she finally landed an entry-level position in the legal department of Shengfeng Group, a rapidly expanding conglomerate known for its dynamic leadership and cutthroat corporate environment. She knew nothing of its CEO, only that he was a reclusive figure, also surnamed Liu. The coincidence was noted and dismissed. Liu was a common surname. Her first few weeks at Shengfeng were challenging. She was an outsider, and her lack of connections made her an easy target for petty office politics. A senior colleague, jealous of Anran's sharp mind and quick grasp of complex cases, seemed intent on making her life difficult, assigning her menial tasks, or subtly sabotaging her work. Yet, Anran persevered, driven by a fierce determination to prove herself, to build a life independent of the Ye family and the man who was, by law but not by heart, her husband. At night, back in the small apartment, she would sometimes find Ming Cheng reading, the lamplight casting his ordinary features in a softer, more thoughtful glow. He would offer quiet words of encouragement if she spoke of her workday frustrations, his advice often surprisingly astute, his insights into corporate dynamics more profound than she would have expected from a poor guy without a steady job. "Don't let them see your frustration," he advised one evening when she was particularly disheartened. "Competence is its own best defense. Focus on your work, and your results will speak for themselves." His words, calm and logical, were a balm to her frayed nerves. She found herself increasingly relying on his quiet presence, his unexpected wisdom. The contract was still the foundation of their arrangement, a ticking clock counting down to their eventual divorce. But somewhere in the shared silences and the small, unexpected kindnesses, a different kind of connection was beginning to form, a fragile shoot of curiosity and a reluctant, burgeoning respect. Ye Anran, the lawyer, was beginning to find her client, Lu Mingcheng, a most intriguing case. Life settled into an uneasy rhythm. Anran dedicated herself to her work at Shengfeng Group, navigating the treacherous currents of office politics with a quiet resilience. Lu Mingcheng remained an enigma, his days spent in ways she couldn't quite fathom, sometimes disappearing for hours, other times found engrossed in complex financial journals that seemed incongruous with his unemployed status. The contract, their strange, unspoken pact, loomed large, yet the small apartment began to feel less like a temporary arrangement and more like a fragile sanctuary. The past, however, had a nasty habit of resurfacing. Anran was at a modest restaurant near her office, grabbing a quick lunch, when she heard a familiar, condescending voice. "Well, well, if it isn't Ye Anran. Slumming it, are we?" Gu Chen, her ex-boyfriend, stood before her, a smirk playing on his handsome, arrogant face. Beside him, preening like a prize peacock, was Ye Qingqing, Anran's stepsister. Gu Chen had ruthlessly dumped Anran for the wealthier, more socially prominent Qingqing, a betrayal that still stung. "Qingqing, darling, look who it is," Gu Chen said, his eyes sweeping over Anran with disdain. "I almost didn't recognize her without the designer labels Daddy Yi used to buy her, though I suppose even those were second-hand from your closet, weren't they, Qingqing?" Qingqing giggled, a malicious sound. "Anran, you always did know your place. And who's this?" Her gaze landed on Lu Mingcheng, who had quietly joined Anran, his expression unreadable. "Oh, don't tell me this is the husband you supposedly picked up off the street? He looks even more pathetic than I imagined. Does he even own a suit that isn't threadbare?" Anran tensed, bracing for the humiliation. But before she could utter a word, Mingcheng spoke, his voice calm, almost bored. "Mr. Gu, Miss Ye. It's impolite to comment on others' financial situations, especially when your own are perhaps not as secure as you project." Gu Chen bristled. "And who are you to talk, pauper?" "I'm the heir to Gu Corporation." "Heir apparent, perhaps," Mingcheng corrected gently, "but fortunes can change, especially for companies that rely on less than ethical practices." There was a subtle emphasis on the last words that made Gu Chen's smirk falter. "What are you implying?" Qingqing snapped, sensing a shift in the dynamic. "Merely an observation," Mingcheng said, his eyes cool and direct, meeting Gu Chen's. "I also observe that my wife is trying to enjoy her meal. Perhaps you could find another table to display your affections." There was a steel in his quiet voice that was surprisingly intimidating. Gu Chen, usually so quick with a cutting remark, found himself at a loss for words. Qingqing, too, seemed momentarily stunned. With a final, contemptuous glare at Anran, they flounced off, their triumphant entrance somewhat deflated. Anran stared at Mingcheng, a mixture of gratitude and bewilderment churning within her. "How did you do that?" He merely shrugged. Some people are all bluster. You just have to call their bluff. But he hadn't blustered, Anran thought. He had been surgical. His words, though quiet, had been precise, targeted. It was the way a skilled lawyer might dismantle an opponent's argument, or a CEO might handle a hostile negotiation. The image of Lu Mingcheng as a simple loser was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Her curiosity, already piqued, intensified. Who was this man she had married? At Shengfeng Group, Anran's competence was beginning to attract attention, not all of it positive. She had successfully handled a particularly complex contract negotiation, earning a rare nod of approval from her department head. This, however, did not sit well with certain colleagues, particularly Lin Wei, a senior associate who had expected the assignment and viewed Anran as an upstart. Newcomers should know their place. Lin Wei remarked snidely during a team meeting after Anran presented her findings. Some people get lucky, but luck runs out. Anran met her gaze evenly. I believe in thorough preparation, not luck, Senior Lin. The undercurrent of hostility was palpable. Anran knew she was being tested, her every move scrutinized. What she didn't know was that Lu Mingcheng, in his true capacity as the CEO of Shengfeng, received daily reports from his trusted assistant, Gao Rui, about the legal department's operations, including the subtle undercurrents of office politics. He'd noted Lin Wei's attempts to undermine Anran, and had already made a mental note. He wouldn't intervene directly. Anran needed to prove her own mettle, but he would ensure the playing field remained fair. His wife, even a contractual one, would not be unfairly targeted under his watch. He found himself increasingly invested in her success, a development that was as unexpected as it was, he had to admit, rather pleasant. The name Mr. Liu was spoken in hushed, almost reverent tones within the walls of Shengfeng Group. He was the phantom CEO, the architect of Shengfeng's meteoric rise, a man of immense power and influence, yet rarely seen. His directives were issued through his tight-lipped assistant, Gao Rui, and his legend grew with every successful quarter, every bold acquisition. Ye Anran, like everyone else in the lower echelons of the company, knew the name, but the man remained a complete enigma. She never, for a moment, connected this mythical figure with the quiet, unassuming Lu Mingcheng, who shared her tiny apartment and occasionally offered surprisingly insightful advice on her legal briefs. Ye Qingqing, however, was not one to be left out of any perceived center of power. Having wheedled her way into an internship at Shengfeng Group through her father's tenuous connections, a placement Liu Lanhua had loudly proclaimed would lead to Qingqing catching the eye of the mysterious CEO himself, she made Anran's work life a particular misery. Qingqing alternated between outright sabotage, accidentally deleting files, misplacing important documents Anran needed, and spreading insidious rumors about Anran's incompetence and her questionable background. Did you hear? Ye Anran only got this job because she's desperate. Probably slept her way in. Qingqing would whisper to anyone who would listen, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Anran, though infuriated, maintained a professional composure, focusing on her work and meticulously documenting Qingqing's every malicious act. She was a lawyer, after all, and evidence was her ally. Lu Mingcheng, through Gao Rui's discreet updates, was well aware of Qingqing's machinations. A cold anger simmered beneath his usually calm exterior. He had seen firsthand the cruelty of the Ye family, and Qingqing was a chip off the old block. While he wanted Anran to stand on her own, he wouldn't allow her to be unfairly destroyed. When a crucial presentation Anran had prepared was corrupted minutes before a major client meeting, Mingcheng, alerted by a worried Gao Rui, made a single, untraceable call. Miraculously, a backup file appeared on Anran's desktop, and an IT technician, looking flustered, mumbled an apology about server glitches. Anran delivered her presentation flawlessly, earning praise from the clients and a grudging respect from her department head. Lin Wei and Ye Qingqing exchanged furious, baffled glances. "You were lucky," Qingqing hissed at Anran later. "Perhaps," Anran replied, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. She was beginning to suspect that her luck had a name, and it might just be Lu Mingcheng. Their evenings in the small apartment took on a new dynamic. The silences were less awkward, more companionable. Anran found herself sharing more about her workday, her frustrations, her small victories. Ming Cheng was an excellent listener, his comments infrequent but always insightful. He never offered direct solutions to her office problems, but his quiet questions often led her to her own conclusions, bolstering her confidence. "Why do you think Lin Wei behaves that way?" he asked one night, as Anran recounted another instance of subtle sabotage. "She feels threatened, I suppose." Anran mused. "She's been there longer, expected more." "And Yi Qingqing?" Anran sighed. "She's always been like this. She can't stand to see me have anything she perceives as good." "So, their motivations are clear," Ming Cheng said simply. Understanding that is half the battle. His pragmatism, his ability to cut through the emotional clutter, was something she was beginning to admire, and, if she were honest with herself, rely on. The 100 yuan contract felt increasingly irrelevant in the face of this quiet, steady support. The man who was her husband in name only was becoming a confidant, a silent partner in her struggle for independence. The lines of their contract were blurring, and Anran found herself both unnerved and strangely comforted by it. One Saturday, Lu Mingcheng surprised Anran. "My grandmother would like to meet you," he announced, his tone casual, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Anran was taken aback. "Your grandmother? Does she know about us? About the contract?" A rare, almost boyish smile touched his lips. "She knows I'm married. She's eager to meet my wife." He paused. "She's not like your family, Anran. She's kind." The unspoken reassurance in his voice decided her. She was nervous, of course. What would this woman, clearly important to Ming Cheng, think of their sham marriage? The meeting took place not in a grand mansion, as Anran might have half expected given the increasingly confusing signals from Ming Cheng, but in a comfortable, sunlit apartment filled with books, plants, and the aroma of freshly baked cookies. Madame Lu was an elegant woman with eyes that held both wisdom and a gentle humor. She greeted Anran with genuine warmth, her gaze shrewd but not unkind. "So, this is Anran," Madame Lu said, taking Anran's hands. "Ming Cheng has told me very little, as usual," she added, with an affectionate eye roll at her grandson. "But he seems happier than I've seen him in years." Anran felt a blush creep up her neck. Throughout the afternoon, Madame Lu spoke of Ming Cheng's childhood, his quiet determination, his aversion to the ostentatious world his family sometimes inhabited. She spoke of his desire for something genuine, something real. She never directly mentioned the contract, but her knowing glances and warm acceptance made Anran feel, for the first time, a sense of belonging, however temporary. "You are a good girl, Anran," Madame Lu said as they were leaving. "You have strength and kindness in you. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And my grandson, he may be a fool in some ways, but he has a good heart." The encounter left Anran feeling strangely moved and more confused than ever about Lu Mingcheng. The poor guy persona was wearing increasingly thin. Meanwhile, the Ye family, along with the still seething President Ma, had not been idle. Furious at Anran's continued defiance and her apparent success at Shengfeng Group, they redoubled their efforts to destroy her. Liu Lanhua, with her penchant for malicious gossip, began spreading rumors that Anran was having an affair with her loser husband, while simultaneously trying to seduce powerful executives at Shengfeng. Ye Qingqing, using her internship, fed damaging and often false information about Anran's work to Lin Wei, who was all too eager to use it. President Ma, his ego bruised and his business ambitions thwarted, resorted to cruder tactics. He sent thugs to intimidate Anran, to threaten Ming Cheng, hoping to scare them into dissolving the marriage. One evening, as Anran and Ming Cheng were returning to their apartment, they were ambushed. The attack was swift and brutal. Anran screamed as a man grabbed her, another lunging for Ming Cheng. But Ming Cheng moved with a speed and precision that belied his unassuming demeanor. He disarmed one attacker with a move that looked like something out of a martial arts film, and incapacitated the other with a single, well-placed blow. "Are you all right?" he asked Anran, his voice tight with concern, his eyes blazing with a cold fury she had never seen before. She could only nod, her heart pounding. "This has President Ma's fingerprints all over it," he said, his voice grim. "And your family's." The incident solidified something within Anran. The fear was real, but so was the burgeoning trust she felt in Lu Mingcheng. He was no longer just a contractual husband, a means to an end. He was her protector, her confidant, the one person who stood between her and the malice of her past. The contract still existed, a legal document filed away, but in the crucible of shared adversity and quiet companionship, something far more real, far more complex, was being forged. The stakes were rising, and Anran knew with a chilling certainty that the final confrontation was drawing near. She also knew, with a certainty that both surprised and frightened her, that she didn't want to face it alone. The Shengfeng Group's annual gala was the event of the season, a glittering affair where the city's elite congregated, deals were struck in hushed tones, and careers were made or broken. This year, the buzz was particularly intense. Rumor had it that the reclusive CEO, the mysterious Mr. Liu, would finally make a public appearance. Ye Anran, as a junior member of the legal department, was expected to attend, a prospect that filled her with a mixture of professional obligation and social dread. She knew Ye Qingqing, Liu Lanhua, and likely Gu Chen and President Ma would be there, vultures circling, eager for any opportunity to humiliate her. Lu Mingcheng, surprisingly, had insisted on accompanying her. "Even a contractual husband has certain social duties," he'd said, a rare teasing light in his eyes. He had even procured a perfectly tailored, albeit understated, dark suit that made him look different. Less like the loser her family derided, and more like a man of quiet, self-possessed elegance. Anran, dressed in a simple but elegant gown she'd found at a second-hand boutique, felt a strange flutter of nerves as they entered the opulent ballroom. The Yi contingent found them almost immediately. "Well, Anran, you actually managed to clean him up a little," Yi Qingqing sneered, her eyes raking over Mingcheng. "But a cheap suit can't hide what he is. Are you planning to introduce your employee husband to the Shengfeng CEO tonight? Perhaps he can beg for a janitorial position," Liu Lanhua cackled. "Don't be ridiculous, Qingqing. People like him aren't even allowed to breathe the same air as Mr. Liu." President Ma, ever the predator, sidled up to Anran. "Anran, my dear, still playing this foolish game? When you're tired of this pauper, remember my offer is still open." His gaze was possessive, making Anran's skin crawl. Gu Chen, meanwhile, was loudly pontificating to a group of acquaintances. "Some people have no shame, trying to climb the social ladder by latching onto anyone they can. Pathetic, really." His eyes flicked pointedly towards Anran and Ming Cheng. Anran felt the familiar sting of humiliation, but before she could respond, Lu Mingcheng placed a calming hand on her arm. "Patience, Anran," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "The evening is still young." The moment arrived with a dramatic hush falling over the ballroom. Gao Rui, Lu Mingcheng's ever-efficient assistant, though Anran only knew him as Assistant Gao, the right-hand man to the CEO, stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. It gives me great pleasure to introduce the President and CEO of Shengfeng Group, Mr. Lu Mingcheng." A spotlight swung, not towards the stage entrance as expected, but directly onto Lu Mingqing, standing beside a stunned Ye Anran. The collective gasp was audible. Ye Qingqing's jaw dropped. Liu Lanhua's eyes bulged. Gu Chen choked on his champagne. President Ma stared, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. Lu Mingqing, the man they had derided as a loser, a vagrant, a pauper, calmly straightened his tie, a faint, almost wolfish smile playing on his lips. He met Anran's wide, shocked eyes, offering her his arm. "Shall we, my dear wife?" Anran was reeling. Her mind struggled to reconcile the quiet, unassuming man who cooked her simple meals and offered her cryptic advice with the powerful, commanding figure now being acknowledged as the head of one of the city's largest corporations. The humble abode, the lack of a job, the easy agreement to a contract marriage, it all clicked into place with a horrifying, bewildering clarity. He had been playing a role, a meticulously crafted deception, and she, Ye Anran, the supposedly shrewd lawyer, had been completely fooled. As Ming Cheng led her towards the stage, the whispers and stunned stares followed them like a tidal wave. Ye Qingqing looked as if she might faint. Liu Lanhua was sputtering incoherently. President Ma seemed to shrink into himself, his earlier bravado vanishing like smoke. On stage, Lu Mingqing was the epitome of power and grace. His speech was brief, eloquent, and visionary. He spoke of Shengfeng's future, of innovation, of integrity, words that seemed to mock the very people who had tried to use and discard Anran. And throughout it all, his arm remained securely around Anran's waist, his gaze returning to her frequently, a silent acknowledgement of her presence, her importance. The face slap, as such moments were often called in the dramatic novels Tian Tian was fond of, was not just a slap, it was a public, resounding demolition. The fallout from the Shengfeng Group Gala was swift and brutal for those who had crossed Ye Anran and, by extension, its now revealed CEO. Lu Mingqing, despite his quiet demeanor, was not a man to be trifled with, especially when it concerned the woman who, contract or not, bore his name. The Ye family business, already teetering on the brink due to Ye Weiguo's mismanagement and Liu Lanhua's extravagant spending, found itself suddenly friendless. Lines of credit dried up. Suppliers demanded upfront payments. Key clients, sensing the shift in the wind and unwilling to alienate Shengfeng Group, began to withdraw their contracts. Ye Weiguo, who had built his precarious empire on bluster and bullying, found himself facing financial ruin. His desperate attempts to reach Lu Mingqing were met with a polite but impenetrable wall in the form of Gao Rui. "Mr. Liu is indisposed," Gao Rui would state coolly, "but he wishes Mr. Ye to know that all business decisions are based purely on merit and sound financial principles." The unspoken message was clear. The Ye family's tactics had no merit, and their financial principles were anything but sound. President Ma's downfall was even more spectacular. Lu Mingqing, with the resources of Shengfeng at his disposal, had quietly commissioned a thorough investigation into Ma's business dealings. The findings were, as Mingqing had suspected, a litany of corruption, illegal practices, and exploitation. Anonymous tips, backed by irrefutable evidence, found their way to the relevant authorities. President Ma, once a swaggering bully, found himself embroiled in a scandal that stripped him of his wealth, his power, and his freedom. His attempts to use Anran as a pawn had backfired spectacularly. Gu Chen, the arrogant ex-boyfriend, saw his own prospects wither. His association with Ye Qingqing, now the daughter of a rapidly declining family, and his public disdain for the pauper, who turned out to be a titan of industry, made him a laughingstock. Doors that had once been open to him slammed shut. His own family, wary of incurring Shengfeng's displeasure, began to distance themselves from their wayward son. Ye Qingqing's dreams of social conquest, ensnaring a wealthy husband, turned to ash. Her internship at Shengfeng Group was unceremoniously terminated for unprofessional conduct and a lack of aptitude. Stripped of her family's wealth and status, her spiteful nature laid bare, she found herself an outcast. Lu Mingcheng orchestrated all of this with a quiet, almost surgical precision. There were no public declarations of war, no overt displays of power, just a series of carefully placed moves leveraging information and influence that brought his and Anran's tormentors to their knees. It was a masterclass in strategic takedown, executed with the cold, calculating efficiency of a CEO protecting his most valuable asset. And Anran, watching it unfold, felt a mixture of awe, trepidation, and a reluctant, undeniable thrill. This was the man she had married, the man who had worn the guise of a loser while wielding the power of a king. The storm had passed, leaving a trail of shattered reputations and broken fortunes in its wake. The Ye family villa felt hollow, its grandeur now a mocking reminder of their fall from grace. Ye Weiguo was a broken man, Liu Lanhua's shrill accusations reduced to bitter whimpers. Ye Qingqing was a shadow of her former self, her arrogance replaced by a sullen resentment. Anran, having ensured her own legal separation from the Ye family's crumbling finances, felt a sense of detached closure, but one confrontation remained. She found Lu Mingcheng in their small apartment. His small apartment, she now realized, was likely just another part of his elaborate charade. He was calmly reading, as if the dramatic unmasking and the subsequent dismantling of several prominent city figures were all in a day's work. Why? The single word was tight, laced with a complex brew of emotions: anger, betrayal, confusion, and a reluctant thread of something akin to admiration. He looked up, his gaze steady. Why, what, Anran? Why the deception, Mingcheng? The poor guy act? The contract? Was it all some kind of game to you? He closed his book, his expression serious. No, Anran, it was never a game. He rose and walked towards her. When you approached me at the Civil Affairs Bureau, you were desperate. You needed a way out, and you offered a straightforward transaction. I accepted for my own reasons. And what reasons were those? She pressed, her arms crossed, a defensive posture. He hesitated for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. I've been disappointed before, Anran. Wealth and status can attract the wrong kind of attention. People see the CEO, the money, not the man. His voice was quiet, almost introspective. I was tired of the pretense, the gold diggers, the carefully constructed facades. Your offer, as unconventional as it was, felt refreshingly honest in its dishonesty. You needed a husband for a purpose, and you were upfront about it. So you decided to test me? She asked, a note of bitterness creeping into her voice. To see if I was just another woman after your money. Perhaps, initially, he admitted. But it became more than that, Anran. I saw your strength, your resilience in the face of your family's cruelty. I saw your determination to build your own life, your own career, without relying on anyone. I saw your kindness, even when you had little reason to be kind. His gaze softened. The contract was a means to an end, for both of us, but what grew between us, at least for me, was not part of any contract. Anran's breath hitched. What? What are you saying? He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. I'm saying, Ye Anran, that I, Lu Mingcheng, the CEO of Shengfeng Group, have fallen in love with the woman who offered me 100 yuan for a contract marriage. His confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. Anran stared at him, her mind reeling. The anger, the sense of betrayal, warred with a dawning understanding, and a feeling she had been trying to suppress for weeks. A deep, undeniable connection to this enigmatic man who had turned her world upside down, first by agreeing to her desperate pact, and now by revealing a truth far more astonishing than she could have ever imagined. The contract had been a shield, a defense mechanism for both of them. But the emotions that had blossomed in the shared confines of their strange marriage were very, very real. The confession hung in the air of the small apartment, a space that had witnessed their bizarre courtship, their shared anxieties, and now this raw, unexpected declaration of love. Ye Anran stared at Lu Mingcheng, the CEO of Shengfeng Group, the man who had worn the mask of poverty with such convincing ease, and felt a maelstrom of emotions. Anger at the deception warred with a profound sense of relief that the strange pull she'd felt towards him wasn't just a figment of her imagination. You love me," she finally managed, the words barely a whisper. "More than I thought possible," Mingcheng admitted, his usual composure tinged with a vulnerability she'd never seen. "Anran, I know the way this started was unconventional, and my reasons for the secrecy were, perhaps, selfish. I was jaded, wary, but you cut through all of that. You showed me what genuine strength and integrity look like, even when you believed you had nothing and I was no one. The days that followed were a period of adjustment, of tentative steps towards a new understanding. The grand Shengfeng Group Gala and its shocking revelations had sent ripples through the city, but within the walls of their small apartment, Anran and Mingcheng focused on dismantling the artifice that had defined their relationship. The original marriage contract, once a symbol of her desperate bid for freedom, now felt like a relic of a past life. One evening, without a word, Mingcheng took the document from the drawer where Anran kept it, and with a shared look, they tore it into pieces. "No more contracts, Anran," he said, his voice firm. "If we are to be together, it will be because we both choose it, with no conditions, no hidden clauses." The final reckoning with the Ye family was less dramatic than their initial confrontations, but no less decisive. Ye Weiguo, his business empire crumbling, his reputation in tatters, attempted a final, desperate appeal to Anran, speaking of familial duty and forgiveness. "Father," Anran said, her voice devoid of the anger that had once consumed her, replaced by a quiet, steely resolve. "You speak of duty, but you never showed me any. You speak of forgiveness, but you never asked for it for the years of neglect and cruelty." She paused. Lu Mingcheng, a silent, supportive presence beside her. "Shengfeng Group will not be bailing out Ye Corporation. That is a business decision based on sound financial principles." It was a clear echo of Gao Rui's earlier pronouncements, and Ye Weiguo knew then that the door was irrevocably closed. He was left to face the consequences of his own avarice and mismanagement. Liu Lanhua and Ye Qingqing, stripped of their wealth and social standing, found their world drastically altered. Qingqing's attempts to salvage her reputation or find another wealthy suitor were met with closed doors and thinly veiled contempt. The city had a long memory, and the tale of the fake poor guy and the social climbing step-sister had become a cautionary anecdote whispered at cocktail parties. Their suffering was a quiet, ignominious erosion of the privileged life they had taken for granted. Anran felt no triumph in their downfall, only a distant sense of justice served. They had, in the end, reaped what they had sown. Her own career at Shengfeng Group, however, flourished. With Mingcheng's identity known, some initially suspected favoritism, but Anran's sharp legal mind, her dedication, and her unwavering ethical compass quickly dispelled any doubts. She earned her promotions, her accolades, on her own merit, often working on cases that were challenging and complex, proving herself to be a formidable asset to the company. Lu Mingcheng, while her staunchest supporter in private, maintained a strict professional boundary at work, allowing her the space to grow and shine independently. He knew her strength, and he reveled in seeing the world recognize it. Their relationship, stripped of pretense, deepened. The small apartment, once a symbol of his deception, became their haven, though they eventually moved to a home more befitting their status. Not a soulless mansion, but a warm, inviting house filled with books, laughter, and the scent of Anran's improving, if still occasionally experimental, cooking. Ming Cheng's grandmother, Madame Liu, became a beloved fixture in their lives, her gentle wisdom and unconditional love a balm to Anran's old wounds. She delighted in teaching Anran the family recipes and recounting embarrassing stories about Ming Cheng's youth, much to his feigned chagrin. There were still moments of insecurity, echoes of the past, that sometimes threatened to cloud their present. Anran occasionally grappled with the sheer scale of Ming Cheng's wealth and influence, feeling like the Cinderella in a story too grand for her. Ming Cheng, in turn, sometimes battled his old cynicism, the fear that their happiness was too fragile, too good to be true. But they navigated these moments together, with an honesty and a commitment that had been forged in the crucible of their unusual beginning. One evening, as they sat on their terrace overlooking the glittering city skyline, Anran turned to him. "Do you ever regret it, Ming Cheng? The way we started?" He took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I regret the years I didn't know you, Anran. I regret any pain my deception caused you. But the path that led me to you, however unorthodox, no, I don't regret that. It showed me who you truly are, and it led me to a love I had stopped believing was possible." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "It wasn't exactly a fairy tale beginning." "Perhaps not," he conceded, a smile in his voice. "But I believe, Ye Anran, that we are writing a rather compelling, happily ever after." Their true wedding, a year after the tearing of the contract, was not a grand public spectacle, but an intimate ceremony attended by close friends, Madame Liu, and Anran's few genuine supporters from her past. It was a celebration not of status or wealth, but of a love that had defied expectations, overcome obstacles, and found its truth in the most unexpected of bargains. Ye Anran, no longer the beleaguered illegitimate daughter, but a respected lawyer and the cherished wife of Lu Mingcheng, looked at her husband, her heart full. He was still an enigma in some ways, a man of quiet depths and formidable intellect, but he was her enigma, her partner, her love. The billionaire's bargain had, against all odds, become a priceless treasure. Their future stretched before them, a landscape of shared dreams and quiet contentment, a testament to the enduring power of love to find its way, even through the most tangled of beginnings.